What's going on, everybody? Welcome to LUMIX Live this week. We've got a bit of a prepared topic that I wanted to kind of talk about. Not super full in depth, but basically just kind of covering some of the questions and kind of comments that I've seen in various different platforms, as we usually do, about all of the different kind of rec quality modes that we have in the camera, because at first glance, especially if you're looking at any like the newer cameras like the S1II series, you start to look and you realize like, all right, there's 19 pages worth of different recording options available. So I wanted to go through, kind of walk through what each of them are, does, why we, kind of use certain formats and different kind of versions for each different type. Where you can find the different options, and then also kind of talk about some of the limitations that you see with some of the, kind of higher end options that we offer in these cameras that no one else is even doing in the industry. So to also maybe put a little bit of perspective in, what the cameras can do versus what, the fact that the vast majority of others can't do a lot of the options that we have. So yeah, I want to kind of cover that. I'm also going to go through like how to, make a little bit more sense of the menus as well. So knowing again that we have that 19 pages, at least in the S1 Mark II, we have 19 pages worth of recording options, kind of going through, how do you kind of like make the menu make a little more sense for you? Because there's a couple ways that you can do that in our cameras. And it really depends on what your personal workflow is. So hopefully by the end of this conversation in this demo, you'll have the tools that you need to, kind of get everything set up so that maybe your workflow is a little bit faster. Maybe, your process of being able to pick what menus you want to work with and or recording options you want to work with, have them a little bit better organized, and also some of the benefits of doing it that way versus having to go into the menus and say change from MP4 to MOV to ProRes. So I'll show you some of the benefits you get by setting it up a couple different ways. We're also, like always, this is also going to be open to Q&A. So if you have questions during the stream, make sure to tag at LUMIX USA, as you can see a couple people are doing. And then we can try to address some of those questions as we go through. Once we start talking about the rec quality options in the camera, I'm going to try to keep that as much as one segment as we can. This way it's just a little bit more organized, and not really kind of jump and interject with different topics throughout, so that if you want to reference this later, kind of like, okay, this is the chunk of the video with the timestamping. This is the chunk of the video that's going to be talking about it, and then everything else is going to be questions. So, yeah. So with that, we can kind of get started. Before we jump into that, I want to remind those of you in the US about LUMIX Pro services. We have the red and the platinum tier here in the United States. This is free for you if you've purchased a new camera. So you just register your camera either with the QR code right down below, or go to lumix-pro.us, and then you can check out both the programs there. You're going to get your 3-year extended manufacturer warranty when you get your camera registered. So as long as you've bought the camera new, you're able to register that up from an authorized dealer. But if you're someone who prefers, higher level service and support, maybe you're a little bit more demanding on your gear, maybe you run in seasonal work and you want to be able to get your equipment checked out and, kind of sorted for the beginning of a new season, well, then maybe you want to take a look at the platinum tier. Our platinum membership is a paid level service that gets you 2-day repairs with next day shipping both ways. You also get 20% off out of warranty repairs, so drops, breaks, cracks, anything like that. You can get a discount on the repair for that. You also get access to a membership hotline. So if you're, someone who prefers to speak to someone on a phone instead of going through chat or email, you have that available to you Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern time. And then on top of that, you also get, the nice welcome gift, which is a Peak Design custom strap for your LUMIX cameras. And yeah, it's a really solid platform for those that are, kind of wanting to have that next level service and support. You even get like the annual sensor cleanings and lens calibrations and firmware updates. If you don't want to do any of that kind of stuff yourself, you could always just send it in to us and have our team do it for you. So I encourage you to take a look at those. If you're not in the US, we have a link down in the description that brings you to the global page to show it what's available within your region. And then if your region is not on there, you can always just reach out to your local Panasonic representatives or your local dealer network where you bought the camera. A lot of times it can be handled through there to get any kind of service and support that you might need. So with that, let's take a look at some of the questions that came through before we actually go into the topic, like we always do. So let's see here. We got a whole bunch of questions that came in and conversations, but one of the things I want to do is, because I did this last week, but I want to make sure I pronounce this name right. Okay, so I think, and we can thank Google Translate if this is correct or not, but Nikita, I think. If that is not your name, I apologize. I'm trying to use some of the technology to help. This way I'm not having to refer to the characters of your name. Yeah, so a bunch of comments came in through here. It was regarding Bluetooth support. So the gist of what was asked here, kind of commented about, was that, well, if the S52X and the S1II are showing that they have Bluetooth 5.0 BLE, theoretically we should be able to bring that to an S52 or an S52X series camera. One of the things that I will caution about that logic is that while they both use the same level of technology, so it's Bluetooth 5.0, it's BLE, so Bluetooth Low Energy, that does not mean it's the same module. It doesn't mean that they're identical. So that's part of where, if we look at a spec sheet and you say, well, by spec sheet, this, and this all line up, it doesn't always necessarily mean that they are the actual same thing. We don't provide part numbers of what components we use, what Wi-Fi modules we're using, what Bluetooth modules we use, the exact processor module that's being used, other than it's either L squared or Venus if it's on the older cameras. So just to make the correlation that they both on a spec list say that they're Bluetooth 5.0 compatible does not mean that they're the same, chipset or the same actual module itself. It's the same thing when you look at computers. You could have like multiple different manufacturers that make Wi-Fi 6 modules, and they all say that they're Wi-Fi 6, but some perform better than others, some have more restrictions than others, some run hotter than others, and all of those things kind of come into play. So it depends on whether or not it is the exact same part, or if it is a different variant that maybe was chosen for different reasons for that particular, chassis design versus a different camera or different power budgets that are available. So I understand where you're coming from, and obviously we always are going to push and ask and request with our engineering team, like, hey, this would be a cool thing to bring back to other cameras if possible. But it's that if possible part that I think a lot of times we have to kind of keep in mind, that these components, there's one thing to say that technology level component is the same, but whether or not the hardware has the exact same functionality, that's different. So yeah, at that point, there's not really anything that we have to say as far as whether or not, the Atomos Bluetooth timecode sync could even come back to the other cameras. Even stuff like the DJI integration over Bluetooth, even that we don't know if, at least at my level, we have no idea if that's something that's going to be, compatible in previous gen cameras. Because again, it relies on some of that hardware that, unless we have the actual part number, you can't really say that it's identical to a previous gen camera or a future camera for that kind of thing. But all of that being said, we do listen. We are, pressing with the engineering team. But there are always those times that can come up where it's like, look, even the best intentions, if the hardware can't do it, the hardware can't do it, kind of thing. So, yeah. Next one that came up was from Kenneth. It says, want BRAW internal recording. That would be a very surprising, interesting thing. BRAW internal, to start with, nobody does BRAW internal outside of Blackmagic. There are no other camera companies that are doing it. A couple other companies have announced that they're adding, Blackmagic Raw over HDMI, but they still haven't even released it, where we have consistently like, hey, we're going to do it, and then within like 3 to 5 months, if it's a brand new camera like with the S1R2, then it gets added. Pretty much as of now, I think every camera except the S9 in our full frame line can do Raw over HDMI at various different, options and recording methods and things like that. So that's kind of where the kind of world is with that. It requires an external recorder. Existing equipment, to my knowledge, just doesn't have the ability to do it. Not even accounting for the fact that there's a massive question mark as to whether or not Blackmagic actually even licenses Blackmagic Raw out to other manufacturers. You can use some deductive reasoning to point out that, well, they probably don't, or there may be some barriers there because no one else has deployed it at all. If it's this, massive, high-end, high-requirement, feature, you would have thought that companies would have been working to put that into the cameras already. It doesn't mean that companies are always not, that they aren't looking to try to do stuff like that, but this goes back to that hardware thing is, with the Bluetooth, is that, hey, you could have the best intentions of wanting to do that kind of stuff or just thinking like, hey, that should be easy to do, but it's not accounting for, one, can the hardware do it? Is it even, possible? Are there, what barriers would be up in place of it? So if you take a moment and kind of think about, what would be the potentials that would block something like that from happening, you come pretty quick to the conclusion that it's usually stuff like that's not a desire to not do. It's usually like, look, it's just something is blocking it somewhere. But then, that also goes to kind of the follow-up of that conversation that was happening there. It was talking about things like Cine DNG or, different flavors of RAW or compressed RAW or, kind of working in uncompressed RAW. With a mirrorless camera, which are hybrid designed cameras, you do also have to put into consideration that, like, one, as I believe I'm pronouncing it right, I think it is Nikita, is that, Cine DNG, I know a lot of people have asked us about, wanting to do Cine DNG in the cameras. And while there are a couple cameras out there that do it, and the back-end support for editing it is kind of dwindling, it comes a lot of times into, well, one, how much storage would you need for some of those files? As it sits, we know like a lot of people, really kind of get on board with like, well, I want to do 4K 60 for, 2 to 5 hours worth of recording. Okay, but if you're talking bit rates or file sizes that now move into the terabytes for a, 10, 20 minute long video, it becomes an impractical solution for most of these cameras. And then on top of it, you run into like, well, what's the editing side like? How required is this actually within the market, or has the market in general, which is users, creators, filmmakers, photographers, whatever segment you're looking at, has the industry decided that, it's not really worth the file size anymore? The quality differences become so minor, the performance becomes so minor, and really it just kind of turns into, are you holding on to an old school way of processing or thinking just because that's what, maybe we did 10, 15 years ago, versus now where, hey, yeah, there may be a much more elegant way to do it that gives you the same, visual, kind of performance, but gives you better image quality, or better processing time, better processing resource requirements, much lower file size, storage, things like that. So all of those things kind of need to come into conversation with it, and just kind of looking at what's actually available and what makes sense. So things like, Cine DNG in mirrorless, cameras that are designed for photo and video. I doubt you're ever going to see that kind of thing, honestly, anymore. Maybe 10 years ago. I know a lot of people that use like the FP and stuff, like having it, but that's also a cinema-oriented camera. It's not really designed as a photographic tool, at least by the way, it's kind of the way the interface is designed. And that makes it great for that purpose. But we build hybrid cameras. We have, these are designed for some use in photography, some use in videography or cinematography or filmmaking, whatever you want to call it. And that scale kind of like, it's a pendulum. It depends on the kind of series. Like the S1R2 is much more like kind of central towards leaning photo. The S1II is much more, kind of leaning towards the video side. S1IIe is kind of like, middle of the ground, kind of depending on how you view it, can view from one side or the other. And that basically means that they're not cinema oriented cameras. They're not, you ever really build that way. But I think it's a testament to show that you, the creators, filmmakers, photographers, video content generators, creators, things like that, that like you guys can take tools and put them into situations that, maybe they're not really designed for and still get amazing work out of them. But yeah, that's kind of where all that is. Piku says, let's start on a high note. Will Panasonic buy Arri? Man, one, that would be so far above anybody that would ever be in conversation online, in a social platform, in a forum, anywhere like that. No one at that level would ever have any knowledge or any, valid opinion on that. But I did see the news that was, I think, on Bloomberg. It's an interesting idea, but also, like, read the article. It's not saying that they are, looking for sale. It says that they're evaluating. I know that that's semantics, but yeah, who knows, man. It's an interesting situation. I mean, Arri's been around forever, and who knows, man. Bigal says, if today's topic is rec qualities, I will return to video slow and quick modes. I hope it'll be fixed and 2 properly siloed modes created. I also wish that 4K 96 and 120 would be included in slow and quick. So I don't really have a ton of updates on the slow and quick. I was able to confirm, after the feedback that you've given, about how slow and quick doesn't seem to fully silo from the standard video mode, and we have brought that up to the engineering team to kind of figure out, like, hey, is this something that we can do? What would be involved with it? Unfortunately, I don't have any kind of updates, for you that are, like, of any substance, at least for now. I am still, trying to get, down to a little bit more of a core understanding of, like, how that system could work, take the feedback that, you've provided and stuff like that. But yeah, this is kind of where we're at now. As far as 96 and 120 frames per second and slow and quick, we can ask about that. It's the first time we've had someone ask about 96 and 120. The thing with slow and quick, for those that don't use it, slow and quick is basically I want to be able to output a pre-slowed down piece of content. Typically by comparison to the actual high frame rate option. So in this case, let's say theoretically we did 96 frames per second in slow and quick, and we have a high frame rate 96 frames per second option. If you put the two of them side by side, your HFR, or high frame rate mode, which is a true 96 frame per second, which means you have to do all your processing in post, that's going to be a higher quality output than the slow and quick option. The slow and quick option is an overcrank or undercrank in a given bit rate. So you're typically going to be shooting at a lower bit rate, but you're having to overcrank and then, kind of slow it down in the camera to create that effect, or to speed it up if you're, doing it the other way around. We got to ask them and see, is there a reason why slow and quick doesn't do 96 or 120? It is fully in the realm of possibility that 96 and 120 frames per second may be too power intensive to do all of that processing, to capture, to do the over and under crank, to actually be able to output it. There's always that possibility as well, because we can do up to things like 120. There are some that can do like up to 180. It depends on the camera. It also depends on the operating modes of the sensor. If the sensor can do it, and if it can do it in an image quality level that we're okay with, that also can be a kind of thing to consider. Even if sensor hardware says it can do, say, 96 frames per second in a specific mode, and then you have to be able to slow it down, and the different scaling options or line skipping or whatever would need to be done to get into that, they all come with different image quality penalties that have to be considered. Like, is this even up to what our standard is? If it's not, then it's a dead end. It's not going to happen. But we can ask them. 100% we can ask them. MP4 Lite on S1II, S1R2, no clue. Honestly, no clue. The thing to remember, MP4 Lite was originally designed for S9. That's why it's still locked at 30 frames per second. It's designed for social media use. But we have heard everyone's feedback. We do push that to the engineering team. I personally agree. I would like to see MP4 Lite in more cameras, but at this point, no clue. We've had a lot of other major things that have been, much higher on the request list, that have a lot bigger support from, the broader user base of the cameras that take precedence over, yeah. I think there's a big influx of LUMIX users because I keep seeing people being a bit lost in the LUMIX menus. Do you think you could also cover the quick menus today? Yeah, at the end, if we have a little bit of time, because I can run up to an hour and a half for today's stream. If we have time at the end, I'll do like a kind of general menu overview. Please give support for Vlog View Assist in the app while remote controlling the camera with the phone. Right now, it shows a flat image. Yeah, we have, obviously for LUMIX Flow, we've gotten a lot of the commentary about wanting to be able to apply a LUT on LUMIX Flow. Biggest thing to remember, LUMIX Flow, it is still like in the 1.0, 1.1 generation. There are constantly things that we are doing to improve, and a lot of it is from now that it's in the world, versus what our engineering logic says it should do versus what you as the user is actually kind of wanting to use it for. Those things are converging, and the engineering team has taken that feedback to, kind of deploy much of those ideas. I have no idea about, timeframes or feasibility with things like Vlog View Assist, but I will 100% tell you we are very aware of it. We do know, and the engineering team is looking at it to see if it's something that could be quickly added into that kind of program. Hybrid zoom for photos. I can't make it work with the 24-60. Lewis, make sure you're not shooting in just RAW. If you're shooting in just RAW, you can't use hybrid zoom or crop zoom. You have to be shooting RAW and JPEG or just JPEGs. 90% of the time, that's the problem. All right, this will be the last question I'll take, and then we'll jump into the demo about the different rec qualities. It says, what's the difference between handheld high resolution versus tripod high resolution? Can I leave it on handheld all the time, even if I want to use it on a tripod? Context is 96 megapixel and S5II. Yeah, this is a really good question. So, high resolution shot mode in our camera obviously uses the stabilization unit. We offer the two different versions of this, so handheld and non-handheld, for a couple of reasons. The most standout reason would be processing time. So if you are on a tripod and you're using tripod mode, it's only taking 8 images. So it's moving the sensor 8 times to, collect all the information, and then it processes those 8 images in to create your high-res image. And then you go in and choose whether or not you want motion blur compensation on or off. Handheld is doing double the work. It's doing 16 images. And the reason for this is that the additional 8 images are there to compensate for movement that the camera makes. Not necessarily what your subject makes, but the movement that your camera makes. No one is able to stand, pixel perfect still for 16 or 8 images, no matter how fast the shutter speed is. You're still going to move, especially when you start going up in resolution, like if you're on an S1R2 or an S1R. So because of that, The processing time is longer when you're using handheld because it goes through all 16 images, it does some comparisons, makes sure that everything can align up right, so that it can then output your final image. The tripod mode doesn't have to do that because it only do 8, because it basically takes that part of the logic and removes it. It says I don't have to worry about the camera movement, so I don't have to be reading gyro data and compare it to the images and then compile them and shift where I need to shift, like all that stuff. As far as the second part of your question, like, could you leave handheld on all the time even if you're on a tripod? You could. I haven't really ever seen a massive or honestly a perceivable general difference between the two. However, like when you're on a tripod. However, I will say I do not recommend doing it that way. Our manual doesn't recommend doing it that way. Because when you are going to be setting it up as handheld, you have a couple of the different things. Like, one, the system is looking for the gyro data, the camera moving. So you could have instances of more failed captures when you have it left on handheld, because the camera's trying to account for all of those images, and it's actively trying to run a process on, did any of these images move? Or did the camera move during any of these images? So that's one thing. Like, you could have the potential of having a higher failure rate of being able to align the images. The other downside is what I mentioned earlier, which is processing time. If I'm doing landscapes, I don't want to do any extra work that I don't have to. So I'll turn it off and then just set motion correction turned on to, like, I think it's mode 1. And I would just go from there. In my opinion, it's kind of just, it's a pretty straightforward thing to do. Because the other thing to remember is that when you put the camera into high resolution shot mode, once you press the menu button, it's going to natively go back to the high res menu when you switch into that mode. So if you are going to be jumping between handheld and tripod, it's not the fastest way to get in there and change it, but it is something that you can change. If you're in a much faster pace or you're worried about missing shots, I wouldn't worry too much about it, honestly. I take it kind of the same logic as stabilization. Stabilization units have gotten so incredibly intelligent, or not intelligent, it's a bad way to put it. They've become so efficient and so reliable now that, if you set a camera still on a tripod, especially with ours, because everything's the electromagnetic, unless you're using the E-stabilization, if the camera doesn't have to move, the camera doesn't have to move. Stabilization's fine. I will put a caveat on that and say if I'm doing ultra long exposures, I will turn stabilization off. Now, does that actually change anything, or is that more of my own mental placebo? Yeah, I'm not skilled enough to, or honestly care enough to do any of that kind of testing, but I do turn it off for ultra long exposure because I don't want any instance of the sensor moving. So yeah, kind of use that as you will, Oasis. I don't think you've really got an issue if you just want to leave it on, but I would recommend doing some tests yourself. Do some shots with it on, do some shots with it off where it's on tripod only. Try to see if you can see a difference there, but just understand that you could have more failed captures with handheld when you're in a stationary position on tripod. Okay, so with that, and for the rest of the questions, don't worry, we will go through more of the questions. We're just going to go over and take a look about the setup here. Let's see, Kenneth. What are you even talking about? ProRes is a file size eater, and we have an internal. Yes, but ProRes is a standardized format across the board. CineDNG isn't. So yeah. Anyway, let's talk about the file formats in the cameras. So we've got, as I mentioned, with the modern cameras like the S1 Mark II, there are up to like 19 pages of recording options found within the cameras. This is a ton of options. And for some people, if you're getting into this camera or you're new to it, that can be a massive, kind of overwhelming thing to look at. So as an example here, to start with, let's talk about the file formats that are available. Now, when you get your cameras, typically what you'll see with a lot of our cameras is that they'll be defaulted into MP4. Now, MP4 is going to give you a couple of different, benefits depending on what it is that you're trying to do as far as an output goes. So for one, if I go into rec quality, you're going to notice right off the bat, MP4, I've got 8-bit options. So if I need an 8-bit option for some reason, if I know, I'm shooting in a baked-in profile, I don't really need 10-bit, I need something that's a much, lighter weight to work with, cool. I can shoot in 10-bit. We have 10-bit up to 30p in this camera. So your 30 frame and your 24 frame can record in your 10-bit, and you do even have HD and full HD and 4K options. The other thing you're going to notice is that your bit rates are also much lower by comparison. So what I mean by that is that, if you look at the 10-bit 30 frames per second option in MP4, it's only 72 megabit. The highest option that you see in MP4 is going to be 100 megabit. Now, there's a reason behind this. It's a bit of a carryover from some of the older generation cameras like GH5 when that came out. And that's that if you remember back to when hybrid log gamma was one of the color profiles that we had launched within the cameras, so it was a direct-to-shoot profile, you'll notice that, one, at the time, a lot of those cameras only recorded in 30 frames per second for 4K. That was like the highest you could get. But HLG in 72 megabit in a 420 10-bit HEVC compression was basically a standard. So that meant that I could take this, record an HLG in this 10-bit file at the proper bit rate, and I could provide it to different platforms. I could provide it at the time to different things like news agencies or any kind of delivery platform, and I could just play it. And the vast majority of televisions or kind of YouTube platforms or whatever that could understand HLG, everything kind of lined up. It was pretty straightforward. You just set it, go, and it's also a good balance of file size and image quality. When we started to go to things like 60 frames per second, this is where it's like, okay, we needed to up the bit rate, so we got it up to 100. That is kind of that area where, bit rate with resolution and with frame rate all need to, as your frame rate and resolution increases, you should theoretically increase your bit rate so you have more data per frame that's being generated, especially when you're in a long GOP codec, because it's IPB, it's creating frames between your keyframes. So, we went up a little bit in the bit rate there to maintain an image quality target that we were going for. But then, we've got the 8-bit options available. And again, those are just so that you've got an option still where, hey, I don't need 10-bit. I don't need the color. Maybe the software that I'm working with doesn't support 10-bit. You've got a choice. These are also lower bit rates that are a little bit more mobile platform editing friendly. So at the time, if I was working on an iPad or an Android tablet or a phone, Android or iOS phone, your 8-bit, 24 frame, relatively moderate bit rate was something that could relatively easily be played across all of those different devices and would work in different platforms. Something else to keep in mind with MP4 is that if you are on any of the cameras that support the XLR2, the XLR2 does not function for 4-channel when you're in MP4 for your recording wrapper. So you got to keep that in mind. If you know that you need to do 4-channel recording or you want to use the XLR adapter and have that 32-bit float audio functionality, you can't use MP4. You got to go to MOV for that. And that's typically because of the different audio formats that are used. So MP4, as you can see in this camera, we've got AAC audio. But then if I come in here and I go to MOV, you'll see that our audio changes to linear PCM. So you have a little bit of differences in the audio levels to think, or the audio versions to think of as well. So if you want 4-channel, you have to be with linear PCM in the MOV format within the camera. Now, Since we switched into MOV, obviously let's kind of go there. We've got MOV, so that's our next format. And obviously it says here, kind of general description here is that it's, ideally for video content that's going to be created or edited later. So that usually indicates that, one, this is where you're going to have access to your higher bit rates, your higher frame rates, your higher resolutions, things that you're not necessarily going to want to work with on a lower powered editing machine, or that you just in general intend to do editing to later. If we look at the S9 as an example, the reason why MP4 Lite was created is that, one, MP4 is a much more universally accepted wrapper for both iOS and Android devices. So that means that if I load it on any of those devices, the phone should be able to handle it. At that point, you're just, kind of tailoring your different bitrate options. Phones typically don't like really high bitrate video if you're in the editing side. Usually they don't have enough processing power for it, or the apps aren't designed for it. So when you go to MOV, knowing that, okay, this is what I'm going to be, working to actually process this piece of content with, it is recommended that you have a decently spec'd out computer that can work with either an H.264 file or an H.265 file. Now, common shorthand within the Lumix ecosystem, if you've ever wondered, well, which format is which wrapper? Which is going to be 265, which is 264, which is an HEVC compression, and which isn't. In the Lumix ecosystem, if you see 420/10-bit/long GOP, that is indicating that it is an H.265 or an HEVC compression. The reason why we use H.265 in the 420 10-bit format or formula, so 420 being the color chroma subsampling, 10-bit being obviously the bit depth, long GOP being the interframe or intraframe compression, whichever one you're using. The reason we use 420 10-bit, it is the much more widely supported version of HEVC or compression of HEVC or flavor of HEVC that can be edited across way more platforms. So if you have an older graphics processing and you're on Windows, if you have anything prior to an RTX 50 series, if you're on Apple, right? Or Apple. If you're on Apple and you're still rocking, an Intel-based system, you're going to have much more limited to no hardware decoding and encoding support for 422 10-bit in HEVC. The early deployments of that, flavor of HEVC were wrought with all kinds of problems where in order to do anything with the footage, you typically had to transcode it because it would choke your computer. It just wouldn't, work. You'd try to scrub a timeline and it would freeze and skip, and there were early reports of crashing because obviously you're pushing your CPU as hard as you possibly can in the earlier era. Now, to be fair, modern day hardware, so RTX 50 series from NVIDIA, the newer, M series processors, have begun adding more and more support for things like 422 10-bit in HEVC compression. However, it's still, when you look at the global space of, how many computers are sold, what operating systems are used, what graphics processors are being used on the Windows side, which generation of processors are most commonly being used in the Apple ecosystem, it's still predominantly, by a good figure, not the ones that can support the higher end or the newer flavor of HEVC, the 422 10-bit side. So as a manufacturer, as someone who is building a product that needs to be as compatible as possible globally, and be aware of how would this affect someone like myself, would this affect you, if you're based in the US, where, the adoption of some of these newer technologies tends to be a little bit higher. Would it affect them? Maybe not as much. You probably still going to lean on the, it could be a 50-50 roll of the dice as to whether or not someone's got it if you're in the Apple ecosystem. It's probably more likely that your modern MacBook is going to be fine with it. But if you go into the Windows side, which, Windows operating systems are still the number one operating system globally by a lot, look at how many people have RTX 50 cards that could actually support 422 10-bit HEVC. It's an incredibly small number. When you look at, and I'll bring some of the gaming world into this, when you look at like video gaming specs, like Steam's hardware survey, when you look at stuff like that and you realize that like the most common graphics card that people use in their computers is either something like a 1060 or maybe a 2060 still, which are 4 or 5 generations old, it's kind of telling as to where, like, okay, maybe from a general reliability standpoint, it's not fully there yet. You could make the argument, why don't you just give the option for it? And it's a fair argument. But you also run into, like, one, if it was never designed to do that compression to begin with, so 422 10-bit HEVC, it's not like you can flip a switch and usually add that. Case in point, look at graphics processors. Only the newest series can do it. The older gen don't have the capability to decode or encode in that format. So all of that to say, if you're looking at our cameras and you see 420 10-bit, it's in HEVC, and it's in an incredibly compatible version of HEVC across the board. If you look and you see 422 10-bit, which I have to scroll kind of far down to see it. Typically with our cameras, if you see an H next to it, usually means that, hey, this is a high bitrate option. So if you see, it's another easy way to kind of find it. If you see 422 10-bit, you will almost always see all I next to that, which means that this is an all intra codec. So every frame is generated. If you're shooting 60 frame, 30 frame, 24 frame, all 5994, all 2997, and all 2398 frames are being generated individually. So if you're someone who's really high on motion cadence or the individual frames being as complete as they possibly can, and all intra frame is what you're going to want to record in at that point. If you're doing things like keying or kind of content where there's really fast motion, or if you're doing things like VFX work, from what I understand, an all intra codec is probably going to be preferred for that particular use case. So even going to things like ProRes, or that's where you'd end up looking at like RAW formats. So with this, you'll see 422 10-bit, all intra. You may also see a long GOP option in here, but these are going to be the H.264 compressions. Now, something else to note about this is that your 422 10-bit versions of the formats that you want to record in. So if we look at, say, 4K, 422 10-bit, all intra, 60p, versus 4K, 420 10-bit, 60p, you're going to notice a pretty big jump between the bit rates that are going to be utilized. Now, common misconception is that, like, you need the highest possible bit rate out there. And if a lot of you may already know this, but there's also a lot of people that don't. If you're already working and like, hey, I really prefer much higher bit rates, all that kind of stuff, just more data, it's a more, kind of thick file to work with. Cool. But when you change your compression, if I'm at H.264 and then I have an H.265, if they both had the equal amount of bit rate, so if I had 400 on this and 400 on this one, the H.265, is visually going to look better because it's a much more efficient compression, so it is better at doing its job because H.265 was originally more of a delivery format, versus H.264, which is fine, but if you're someone that really looks at the different details and you're just looking at bitrate, we're taking everything else out of the conversation. If you're just looking at bitrate, if they were both equal, H.265 is going to visually look better, subjectively, visually look better than H.264. The reason for that is because of how much more efficient it is. It's better at the way that it handles things like noise. It doesn't need as high of a bit rate to attain that image quality. So with H.264 footage or anything that's 422 10-bit in either all intra or long GOP, you're going to notice that those are going to have higher bit rates. And it'll vary depending on the frame rate and the resolution, how high those go. But within the camera, we have acknowledged that people have wanted, a higher bitrate all-intra option, but maybe not so high to necessarily go to, say, ProRes. So that's where we added things like 600 megabit per second or 800 megabit per second. And you'll note these within our new system with either an H or an L. So if I scroll down here and let's go to a C4K option. So say here's C4K, 10-bit 60p, and we're in 422 all-intra. So high would be 800 megabit per second. Low is going to be 600 megabit per second. And then if I go down one more, you'll see we have a 422 10-bit long GOP that drops all the way down to 200 megabit per second. So the name of the game there is you've got your choices. If I know that I'm doing VFX, or I know that I'm doing things where I need every single frame and I want every single individual image being captured for all 60 frames, cool. I go to the all-intra options, and you know that because I'm doing every single individual frame, the bitrate has to be higher. So now we can go up to 800. Key thing about the 800 versus 600 option, 600 megabit per second can be recorded to an SD card. 800 megabit per second has to be done to either CF Express or to an external SSD. And on the left-hand side of the menu option here, you'll see whether or not hybrid log gamma is available, whether or not proxies can be created, and more importantly, whether or not or which recordable memory solution can be used for those particular formats. So if you look at the 600 megabit option, you see that card 1, card 2, and SSD are visible. So card 1 being CF Express, card 2 being SD, and SSD obviously being SSD. Or if I go to high, you notice that the SD card is removed from that list because you can't do the 800 megabits per second to an SD card. Reason for that, 800 megabits per second is above what the V90 spec, kind of sustained write speed would be. So there's no guarantee that it's going to work. So it's just removed. It doesn't, we don't give you the option to record in that for it. Last but not least is the S and Q options. So when you look at what's available within our camera for things like slow and quick, you'll notice that within this menu you'll see an S and Q available. Now this is an indicator when you're in standard video mode, just that like, hey, the option that you're in can record in slow and quick. If I were to select this, and I hope it doesn't break my switch, it didn't. Cool. So you'll see that I've got, I'm selected in a recording mode that says, hey, yes, I can use slow and quick here. It's a 420 10-bit long GOP. It's 200 megabits per second. But you'll notice that slow and quick is not selectable here. It means that I have to actually switch to the slow and quick menu option. And when I click into that, you'll see slow and quick record settings. And this is where I can change what that frame rate is. So I can do a 60 times fast speed. So this would be like a hyperlapse or a time lapse. Or I can go to, in this case, 75 frames per second and do a 1.25% slowdown. The point of this is that it's going to record out into that into the 5994. So it's taking the frame rate and then doing the pre-slowdown for you. So let's change this back to, actually, let's get out of slow and quickly here. Back to standard, and then let's bring this back to a frame rate that we're able to do for this demonstration. All right, so we're at, let's bring this up here just so it looks a little bit better. All right, so we've covered MOV. The only other thing I'd mention here is that within MOV, we do have 420 8-bit options as well. So you do have an MOV wrapper if that's what you prefer to work in. They will be found in here, and you have access to them. Now, as you can see, I've only gone through 9 of the 19 pages. I still have 10 pages that are available. So there are a ton of different options under the MOV. That's probably the largest set of recording options available within the camera. Now, the last rec file format that we're going to take a look at is ProRes. So this will be Apple ProRes. In the cameras that have the ability to record in this option, you'll see that it's all been bundled into one Apple ProRes recording format. So that's if I want to do RAW, or if I just want to record ProRes or 422 or 422 HQ. These are definitely, much more for, I'm going to be doing higher level work. I need to have the highest, performance that I can. I want to have benefits of things like the least amount of noise processing, like stuff like that. And you also have compatibility to consider. A lot of platforms tend to prefer ProRes because it's less compressed, which means I don't need to have as high-end performance of a computer to actually ingest and work with the footage. So it tends to be a little bit easier that way. And some platforms or some production studios, if you're working on a much higher level, may have this as a requirement that, hey, if you're going to, footage delivery to us is required to be in ProRes because it fits their post-production workflow. So you have that option within our cameras. And it does also, again, it warns you like, hey, you need a high-performing PC to do this. Just more on the sense that these are big files. And you'll see what I mean by these are big files. So to start with, you've got your RAW options in here. So RAW HQ and RAW. So the highest end on an S1 Mark II is going to be the 5.8K at 30p. And in our RAW format, these are going to be 17:9 ratio. And you'll notice that that's 4.2 gigabits per second. Now, I have a 1 terabyte SSD attached to this camera right now through the Kondor Blue and ProBlade SSD combo. In that recording mode, I'm getting 21 and a half minutes of recording. That is a lot at 4.2 gigabit. Now, if we were to talk about Cinema DNG, we're talking less time than this, like way less time, if I were to try to use the same media storage. So you start to see where some of the practicalities don't necessarily make a lot of sense. But we do also have other options. So you have a non-HQ version, which is 2.8 gigabit, which gets me 32 minutes, a little bit more time. If I go down even further, this is where you'll see that we get into the ProRes options. So 1.9 gig, 1.3 gig if I don't want to do HQ. And then when I start changing into different frame rates can also affect this as well to a lesser degree. So 1.5 to 1 gig. When you get down into the full HD options, you'll see that you've got full HD ProRes in up to 913 megabit per second, and this is a 3.3K. So some of these options, if we look and say 3.3K 24p ProRes 422, that's 487 megabit. You still have to record these ProRes options to a CF Express or an SSD, but I can go all the way down here, and again, we've got 9 pages worth of ProRes options. I can go all the way down into some of the full HD options. And when we get into full HD, this is where you'll see that, hey, I can record to SD card as well. Your full HD up to 60 frames per second, your 24 frame, all the way down into the lowest, which would be 121 megabit per second in ProRes. Now, the benefit here, obviously, ProRes, they're going to be an all-intra option. You're going to get the 422 color space. They're going to be 10-bit for the color process or the chroma subsampling. Your bit rates are just going to come down to whether or not between HQ and non is, do I want higher quality with a higher bit rate at the same given settings or not? Now that we've kind of covered the general overview, like I said, I'm not going to go line by line with all of these. You can see why, looking at all of these different, kind of recording options can be pretty daunting if you haven't ever really worked with any of these before. 19 pages in MOV format is a ton to have to kind of keep in mind. So what we've done within the cameras, we've given you a couple of ways that you can make sense of these different recording options. To start with, if I go back into the menu, you'll see I've got the rec quality menu, but right underneath it, you'll see rec quality, quote, or bracket, my list, and it's grayed out by default. If I go into this, it says menu item can't be set. It's not the best description in the world, I know. But if I wanted to be able to use this, I can go into the rec quality and I can say, hey, I like being able to record 24 frames per second for my 6K open gate. You'll see on the bottom left under recordable slot, it says add to list. So now if I press the quick menu button, it says add to my list, click yes. Now say I want to be able to have my high frame rate option, so I'm going to go to 5.1K for 60p, which again is going to be a 420 10-bit. I want to add that one as well, so I can always be able to just jump quickly to my 60p option. I'm going to add this one as well. Say I want to be able to go down and do a high frame rate option. Say I want to do 96 frames per second. So let's scroll through here and let's try to find 96 frames per second. We're going. That's right, I got to go down to 4K. So let's go down to 4K. So we've got 60, 60. There's our 96 frame. So let's take the 96 frame and let's add that one in there as well. But then let's say like, hey, you know, there's a couple times where I know I'm going to need to be recording in ProRes. I want to have access to at least one RAW format. So let's go to 5.8K 24p standard RAW. Like I need just ProRes RAW. I don't need ProRes RAW HQ. Let's add that one to the menu as well. But then last but not least, let's say that there's that one-off opportunity where I know like, hey, I'm doing this for like a really simple thing. I just need a full HD. Let's do this at the 30 frames per second. Let's say it's like a social media only, need that a client wants that for, right? Well, let's add that to the list too. Now, what you'll see is that if I go to, back to the main menu, you're going to notice that the My Rec quality, or My List, is now lit up. I can actually go in and take a look at this. So if I go into this, now you'll see that I've got my MOV options that I added in here. So 6K, 5.1K, and that 4K 96. But then also I've got my RAW format, and I've got my Full HD MP4. So I have all of these different options in one menu place now. So all of the options that I know I need access to pretty quickly, great, they're all in one menu. I don't have to think and go, oh crap, I gotta go, which menu was that in? Was that an MOV or was that Apple ProRes? Where is it in the menu? And then when I get into MOV or into ProRes, what page is it on? Do I have to remember all of that on the top of my head, or would it be better if I can just take those, put them into one spot, because these are the options that I really only ever use. So, cool. We've got it all set there. Now, before I go to the next part, I want to point out someone like myself that I've worked with these cameras for over 10 years. I know our menus pretty much inside and out. Sometimes it may take me a little bit to find one or two options that are, way less commonly used, but I can usually within, a second or two, I can figure out where to go, and I can instruct someone on where to find things. If you're out in the field, you don't have time for that. You don't really have time to be going in, and especially if you haven't set things up like my menu, you don't really have time to be like, all right, well, which page is it on? I know that I want a 4K. I know that I want 96 frames per second, but is that going to be up at the top because is it going to be frame rate listed, or is it going to be down at the bottom because it's going to be closer to 4K? Like, how does that work? Well, our engineers thought about that, and under the rec quality option, you'll see an option to press the display button. Well, if I press that display button, I have filtering options. I can say, hey, I know that I'm looking for everything that is, let's say, 240 frames per second. Cool. Once I filter for that, it tells me, hey, there's 3 results for you. Is that narrowed down enough? For this case, yeah. So let's press display, and cool. I've got my 240 options for full HD. I've got my 10-bit long GOP. I've got my other 10-bit long GOP, whether or not I want 420 or 422. And then I also have my 422 all intra option at that 240 frames per second. Great. I found it really quickly. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to figure out, is that going to be down under full HD, or is that going to be under, how is it organized? Say I want to add that into my list. Cool. We found it. I can then also go back into that filtering, and let's say let's say we're doing a 24 frames per second project. Well, I've got 25 options. For some people, cool. 25's, it's a lot easier than, how many options are in it? 114 options in MOV. So 114 down to 24, that's a pretty big jump. So let's put this back down to 24. But let's say I know that I need to be able to record in all intra for this. Well, this is where I'd go down into codec, and I can select, and this is where that point I mentioned before comes in handy, understanding which options are going to be which. I can look and say, okay, 422/10-I, so 422 10-bit I for all intra. I can select on this. Now I've got 5 options. But now I need to figure out, hey, I know that I need to have this in 4K. So let me scroll down to my 4K because I want a 16:9. There we go. I'm down to one option. It would help if I hit the right option for that. So it's this. Let's go down back into 4K. And I know that I want all intra. Hit OK. Cool. There's my 422 10-bit all intra 400 megabit per second option. It's kind of like the classic 422 10-bit from the cameras. If I were to take off the resolution option, you'll see that I've got a 3.3K, C4K, CS4K. So this is the 2:4:1 ratio. So this is the CinemaScope option. I have my 4K, and then I also have a full HD. So being able to filter these options out is one additional way to be able to quickly jump through the menu. Now, is that something that you're necessarily going to do when you're out in the field? Maybe, maybe not, but this can be an easy way if you're really trying to find that one particular option, or you just want to know what's available to me in this combination. Cool, it's all filtered down for you. Now, once you've got all that stuff filtered, so let's say, all right, I created my list here. I've got my 6K, 5.1K, I've got my C4K, my RAW, my full HD 8-bit, and I've got my high frame rate or ultra high frame rate 240 frame. Cool. But I want to be able to quickly and easily access those. So I want to be able to change them. And by default, if I were to click the Q menu, let me fix my camera angle here. So if I were to do my quick menu, by default, you'll notice that you have whatever my wrapper is, so MP4, MOV, or ProRes. Right next to that, I've got rec quality. But this rec quality is all 114 options. So if I had to try to be quick at jumping through the different frame rate options or different codec options, this is a nightmare to be able to do. It's 114 options in a single string. So it takes a lot of scrolling. This is why we even went into the process of being able to go into the setup menu, go into the custom settings. So I want to go into the quick menu. So this will be under setup, operations page 1, go to quick menu settings, and then I can come down in here and customize for video slow and quick and add, instead of just rec quality, I can change this to my rec quality. Now what this does is if I go and I'm in my shooting mode, right? If I click my quick menu, now the option here is only going to show the items that I put into my rec quality. So if I need to jump between these quickly, I can just turn the dial here and change them. And you'll see so far, I'm just changing between my MOV options. So C4K, my open gate options, cool. But I can also from here just switch to RAW, I can switch to MP4, and I can switch to that ultra high frame rate. I don't have to go into the menu to change first which recording codec I'm using or which compression I'm using. I don't have to say MOV, MP4, or Apple ProRes. Now everything can be controlled right from here, and it will automatically change which codec is used. What do we call it in camera? It changes which rec quality, rec file format is used. I slipped up on that one. Sorry, y'all. So yeah, this makes it super, super easy to have the handful of codecs that you know you need to use, be able to change them and not have to fiddle around with changing your file format. You just pick the resolution that you want, and depending on which one you're in, so like right now I'm in C4K 96 frame, I can change full, I can go APS-C, or I can go to pixel to pixel. You'll notice APS-C and pixel to pixel don't really have that big of a difference when you're in 4K on a 24 megapixel sensor. It's very different in the S1R2. So let's go, let's put this back to 6K 24 frame. There are other ways to customize your frame rates and options like that, and we will talk about those in different videos. One of the other ways that a lot of people will do this is you'll set your C1 through C5-5 up as, you know, the like each one of them would be your different frame rate or your different resolution, and that's another great way to do it. However, at that point, it's a little more time consuming to set up on front, because you have to set up each of those profiles in the mode that you're going to record and then save them out, which is why we'll do that in a separate video. But I think this way of being able to manage your frame rates and resolutions and find which ones you want can be a really easy way to manage just the sheer volume of what we have in this camera. You can add and remove those different options from the My List if you want, so you're not always stuck with having what you first put in there. You just go in and press Q button again when you're in that menu. So if I go here, go to rec quality, all I'd have to do is say like, hey, you know, like I never shoot RAW, so I don't really ever need it. So I can just hit Q and just have it remove the RAW option out of that menu, and I'm good to go. So, yeah, that's probably about the most I can probably describe for today on that. As I said, I am going to go into more detail in a couple of different ways on, you know, maybe next week's video or next week's stream, so that we can give you the alternate, like the other ways that some people like to set their cameras up. What I want to do now, though, is I want to jump back into the chat, because I've been rambling for a good 30 minutes without interacting with any of you. Yeah, let's get some conversations going. I think we left off with... let's see here. David. My Panasonic video camera in 1985, PV200. VHS camcorder. That camera actually, when zoomed all the way in, the picture wasn't sharpest. Is that the opposite today? I mean, yeah, optic designs and recording media have massively changed since 1985. So modern cameras and lenses and optics and all that stuff and sensor and resolutions and all that, yeah, you're going to have massive differences. Rhett, got my S1II and I love it so far. Man, it's crazy good. Love the more organic image. Hope to test the S1R2 eventually. Yeah. I personally like the S1R2 more. I am much more a photographer, as I've always said here, to where the video functionality on the S1R2 is more than enough for me. I record stuff like this. If I really need long recording, I'll use an S1IIe or an S1II. But I don't record fast motion stuff, and I don't whip my camera around. I don't need any of the stuff that the S1II has personally. So, let's see here. Any plans to release parfocal lenses, either L mount and or MFT? David, so our lenses, like, this is the 24-70. So this is the 24-70 S Pro. So this was one of the earliest lenses in the full frame lineup. This is an electronically parfocal lens. So that means that if I set it to 70 millimeter, manually set the focus point I want, and then zoom back out, the system through the focus motors is going to maintain the focus point as I rotate the manual focus ring. That is the same as on all of our newer lenses. So the vast majority, if not all, of the zoom lenses within the L mount are electronically parfocal. It is a little different than a mechanically parfocal lens, or parfocal lens, but you have parfocal tendencies with our lenses. You also have massively controlled focus breathing done optically, not through software. When you go in the Micro Four Thirds world, it's going to be a lot more of the newer lenses that were released on Micro Four Thirds, because back when that system came out, parfocal lenses in interchangeable lens cameras didn't exist. It wasn't something that was actually really ever requested or needed within that segment. But newer lenses like the 10 to 25, the 25 to 50, I believe the 8 to 18, I would have to double check on that one. I believe the 12 to 35 and the 35 to 100, I think the 45 to 175, well, maybe that one isn't. But a vast majority of them of the newer lenses are electronically parfocal. So you will be able to get a similar effect that you probably would use with a traditional mechanically parfocal lens, but not have to deal with the cost or the size and weight to have all of those elements linked up properly so that they effectively move in the right ways to maintain focus that way. Let's see here. It's genuinely awesome when a company representative can respond live during a stream. It's really cool. This is why we've been doing them, man. This is the 6th year we've been doing them. It's been a little bit more difficult over the last year and a half to maintain the every Thursday schedule, but yeah, that's why we've got this platform, is so y'all can ask us questions, and hopefully I can share some of my knowledge of the product with you. FC says, I love the colors from sample LUT 3 that's built in the GH7. Is it possible to extract .cube file from the camera to use it in post for RAW? So you can't export it from the camera. However, if FC, if you open up Lumix Lab, open up the app, go into the LUTs that are on the camera, so you can go have the camera be shown. I believe from the app, I've never done this before, I believe from the app you can click the 3 dots and you can save it, export it out. If not, I think sample LUT 3 is one of the ones that's was early on deployed in there. I can take a look and see if I can get information as to what sample LUT 3 was based on, but I'm not 100% sure. I would take a look at sample LUT 3, take a look at the LUT library that's there, kind of see if there's one that's kind of close to it, and then you could do it that way. But yeah, you can't take it out from the camera. Hey Kofi, how are you? It's here. Thanks for answering my question last week. Just a heads up, I only see the S1II and the S1R2 at Best Buy. I don't see the S1IIe, but it could be on me. It could be that they just don't have inventory, or the S1IIe might not be a camera that's sold through Best Buy. It's possible. I'm not 100% sure. I can take a look and check in on that though, but they should all be, at least for online, to my knowledge, but I don't know a ton of all the details about how that kind of stuff would work. So, Deva, I think it's Deva or Diva. I'm gonna say Deva. I like the sound of Deva better. That was mean. I'm sorry. It says, is there any plan for a Lumix RAW like B-RAW is for Blackmagic? No. I get what people's sentiment about wanting us to make your own RAW format, so that we can, have, our compression or whatever with it. I get the sentiment. The practicality of it is pointless. The amount of having to, one, develop it, make it work well enough that it's competitive to things that are already established in the market. So B-RAW, ProRes RAW, Cine DNG, Red Code, all the different formats. Was it ARRICORE now? All of this stuff. To do all of that stuff versus just we've got ProRes RAW. We can do Blackmagic RAW over HDMI. It doesn't make sense to add one more RAW format to the industry. You also run into will the software companies support it? What is required on that side of it? We've seen raw formats get deployed from other manufacturers that end up failing or falling flat on their face because they don't get software support, because companies like Adobe or Resolve have no desire to support it. It's one additional thing that has to be added in and figured out, and who pays for that, like all that kind of stuff. So it just doesn't make sense. There isn't going to be a Lumix RAW for video. Yeah. So. FC, will recording in 422 10-bit H.264 improve fixing white balance mistakes in post compared to 420 10-bit HEVC? Not really, no. 10-bit file, and whether or not you're 420 or 422, you're not really going to be able to see a difference. I would argue, and this will be a hot take, and if you believe this, then more power to you. It's not a personal statement against anybody. People cannot tell for average everyday use, for wedding, event, general film like photography, videography. Y'all can't tell the difference between 422 10-bit and 420 10-bit unless you are in a situation where you are massively pushing a grade, which means either something was exposed wrong or your look is just super aggressive that probably is not, like, one, you shouldn't be shooting in a compressed codec for something like that anyway. That's why you'd bump up to like RAW or ProRes for something like that. In general, no, it's not going to make a difference for your white balance mistakes between the two of them. The thing that I will say that you will notice, potentially, and this is going to be very specific to what you try to, or like what you film, is if I'm doing fast motion, if I need to do keying work, so green screen, or if I need to be adding VFX into my content, that's where you're going to want to prefer to do 422 10-bit and an all intra, which would be H.264, or you'd be going into ProRes or RAW. 420 10-bit, because it's a long GOP or an IPB codec, you run into problems where, like, generated graphics, because they're not designed that way, generated graphics are going to look a little odd. Like, you may see, like, some oddities with it. They're not going to mesh up as well. If I'm doing keying work, if I'm doing, green screen, 420 means you have less color resolution, or it's a very broad way to put it, but we're going to go with it. You have less color resolution. So that means that if I really punch in, I'm going to see stair stepping, or, like the strands of my hair on a green screen are going to kind of, flicker in and out of the key, where 422 10-bit is going to be better than 420, but ultimately you'd want to go with something like RAW or a, 4444, go all the way up to the top. It's a matter of what your, I would say, tolerance is for some of these things and what your delivery platform is. What I will say on things like keying, the argument about using 422 10-bit for keying. If you look at YouTube and platforms like Twitch, which have been very heavily, especially in the gaming industry, especially heavy for using things like green screen behind the streamer that is now being overlaid with gameplay, or you're looking at stuff like Linus Tech Tips, I think is a great example of this, because like their Short Circuit and some of the, or not Short Circuit, Tech Quickie and some of the other things that they shoot on green screen. Now, yeah, they're using higher end cameras. They're using, I think they use FX cameras, but they're using like higher end cameras. If you go through the series of, like how that looks, what you see with, some really higher end production cameras versus what you see some like streamers doing, which we know are either using things like webcams, some of them are using interchangeable lens cameras. I know there's a couple that use R cameras, things like that. A lot of the full frame and Super 35 interchangeable lens mirrorless cameras are used in that world. That entire world is shooting in either, even a lot of them may even just be shooting in 8-bit because they just plug the camera in and go. They don't need any of the really higher end stuff. Really take a look and think about what your end user is viewing and what kind of job it is. If it's a big paid job and you're doing keying work, yeah, of course, shoot at the higher bit rates, shoot in the higher end codecs and all that stuff. If this is stuff for social media, for YouTube, for Twitch, use the appropriate modes that make sense. Not everything always needs to be, have to use the top of the line for all of these things. Sometimes saving yourself the headache of file size or format and things like that. So, yeah, the keying side, that's where you'd just be aware on the keying side of it. McCary, are battery grips with fans doable for LUMIX engineers? I mean, doable, but they wouldn't do anything. A battery grip with a fan wouldn't do anything for our cameras. I know what you're referencing because there is a camera brand out there that had built a grip that has a fan that can integrate into the body, but that grip was integrated into the lower vent inputs into the chassis, so it could circulate air that way. I will leave it up to people out there to make their own judgment as to whether or not it was actually like super beneficial. What I'll tell you is that a lot of these solutions, I had this conversation with someone the other day. It's one thing to say, hey, you should have slapped a bigger fan on it, or you should use bigger fans, or hey, product X, Y, and Z can also record 4K 60 but doesn't have this or that, right? What I will push back to you is say, well, that camera is only doing it from exponentially lower resolution, which means it's not generating as much heat, which means it's a much softer looking image because you're at pixel to pixel. It's been proven that it's a much softer looking image. And it's it's not pushing the hardware as hard. When you look at some of the other products, like what we do, we are typically always downsampling. We're typically always giving you a much higher resolution. It's usually, like I said, it's downsampled, so you're going to get much more detail. There's more processing time and all that kind of stuff there. Just saying to slap, use, I'm not saying slap, but like, would a bigger fan fix it? Not necessarily. Would putting it in a different chassis like that change things? Not necessarily. All of that stuff gets thought through well in advance before products coming out. Yeah. We don't need more options. What we need is the ability to set the exact bitrate ourselves. It's an interesting idea about being able to set bitrate yourself, kind of like you can do in software. The one thing I'd say is that every company, a company is not going to ever do that. Mainly because bitrate can tie so hard to the image quality that outputs from the camera. And in this series of type products, so interchangeable lens cameras that are designed as hybrid, you have to remember that there is a very large portion of users that may not be as educated as you are for, how bitrate affects. So that means that you are very likely to run into a situation where you get someone who thinks they've got everything right, they know enough, everything's cool, but their bit rate's too low. Now you got to go into troubleshooting that. So being able to just set your own bit rate doesn't actually fix the problem. If anything, that actually opens up a lot more problems, because now you're like, well, because of the way the internet works and the way society works, the second one person has a poor experience with it, everyone is going to jump on top of it and then all of a sudden blame the product and not say, oh, well, that person put it in the wrong bit rate. It's not actually the camera's fault. It's because they didn't know how to use the camera. And if any of us ever said that, or a brand ever said that, that's not something we want to say, because most of the time it's a very challenging thing. A lot of times it can be user error, but a lot of times it's more because either people didn't know what to do or they're not familiar enough with the product. So trying to help and educate and bring someone's level of knowledge up while also identifying like, hey, this is something that if you're in this tier or you're using this kind of product, it's a learning experience. probably do a little more research before just changing a bunch of stuff. That's why you won't see things like how software handles bitrate for exports done in cameras. It also changes massively because higher bit rates can pump a ton more heat into the camera. Lower bit rates, you run into where now you're like massively under providing bit rate to that particular format. Yeah, it would not be a good solution for an interchange, like a product like this. In theory, it's cool, but yeah. I've been using a Sigma 23 APS-C lens on the S1II. Sadly, I have option for full frame image area mode at grayed out. I cannot select full area mode, and also open gate recording has disappeared. Solution. I'm going to short your name to Manny. There is no solution for that. You are using a lens that is designed for Super 35 or APS-C coverage, so it cannot cover a full frame 35mm sensor. The only solution you would have with that particular setup, especially because it's a modern electronic lens, is change the lens. Buy a full frame version of the lens. I know that's not what a lot of people like to hear, but that's just a fact. It's APS-C. It's never going to cover the full frame, and the camera's never going to let you do it. Yeah. What's your favorite compact MFT or point-and-shoot camera? It's actually the LX100 Mark II right now for point-and-shoot. The LX100, I took that actually when I went to Houston a week and a half ago to go see Volbeat, which was an amazing show, by the way. Yeah, that's one of my favorite ones to travel with. I don't take it out as often as I probably should. It's one of the downsides when I have access to pretty much all of the cameras is even though I love those cameras, I tend to be like either trying to make sure I know some of these other the newer products in and out so that I can help all of you. And as far as like the MFT cameras, most of my Micro Four Thirds cameras are either out on loan with people that wanted to take a look at them, or I've just, because I've had more questions on the S series, I've had to be using them. So let's see, we got about like 5-10 more minutes. Where did we go? Need super telephoto lenses, LUMIX branded, and another vote for power zooms to come back. Thanks, McCary. Last question for me. Will there be an equivalent to the YAGH, the YAG? No. No. The closest modern day like equivalent would be the XLR2. That gives us, 2 XLRs in, it gives you the 3.5 out, it's 32-bit float. It's what the YAGH was, truthfully, originally kind of conceptualized as. The big difference, obviously, is that the YAGH on the GH4 gave that camera the ability to do quad SDI out. So that converted the mini HDMI to a full-size HDMI out plus the quad SDI. You won't see another product like that in modern times. They're just not needed. What's the best recommended power delivery power bank for the GH7? Personally, I am in love with this. This is a SmallRig V-mount battery. So this is a standard like video cinema oriented V-mount battery that has USB-C, and it has so I can charge and output over USB-C. It's got dual barrel jack outputs that I think are 12. You have a 12 volt out and an 8 volt out, and then you have a D-tap on the side. So depending on what you're trying to power, this is the one of the solutions I recommend now, because let me just shift my camera around here so I can show you how I have my camera set up. And we will do it this way. Sorry, this is rigged up on the demo camera that I'm using, so I just have to shift and plug things in. So there's that. And then there's that. And then this comes over here. So this is how I have my camera set up if I am going to be recording video. So use this for whatever kind of comparison you'd want. Lock my battery down. So this is how I have mine set up. This is an S1II Series. It has the battery here, USB-C coming out of the top. I just have it, kind of cable managed back here. And then I've got my DCC-18 plugged in to that battery. On this side, I've got my USB-C here for the SSD handle. So that's my little tiny rig. And then the battery is held on with a SmallRig. I forget exactly what they called this, but it's an extendable V-mount, like dummy V-mount holder. So now everything can, hold tight together. It's got an Arca plate on the bottom, so I can drop this on my Peak Design tripod when I'm filming like training content. When I'm done with it, I can just take it off and I shoot to the SSDs. So I can take these out and throw it into my ProBlade station and immediately start my backups and edit directly off it if I needed to. So that's the one that I would recommend, Macari. It's the SmallRig. This is the VB50. Is it VB50? Yeah, this is the VB50. They make a lot more of them. They make like a VB99. They make a VB200, I think. And then they make different versions of them. And they come in different colors. Personally, I just like this because I am terrible at losing stuff like this. I know it's big. I know it would be stupid to lose something like this, but I am big with I will place it down somewhere in my office and then I will never find it for like 3 weeks. Because I'm absent-minded like that. Let's see here. Rhett, I might have to email you. Some of my lenses, like the 10-25, don't seem like trying to roll on G7s. They run the G6. Still need to do side-by-side testing. Yeah, Rhett. Shoot me an email. Let's check in on that. Will there ever be a chart with dynamic range for the different ISO settings like Arri and Blackmagic does? I don't believe so. Matt and I have asked for that for a while, but there's a difference in, so the way Arri handles their conversion gain, like their gain, it's either you have an analog gain or digital gain, so you'll have a difference in the way things are handled. If you ever look at Arri's LUTs that they have support for, they're all designed for 800 ISO on the Arri. So that means if you're shooting or you're gaining at a different ISO, the LUTs aren't designed for that. Where our system is designed to have the dynamic range kind of slide properly with the log curve. So it's designed across the different ISO values. So it's a little different. I would guess that because of the way Blackmagic has set their stuff up, they're probably more in line with how Arri is doing it for digital versus analog gain. So that's why you can have some charts like that, because the distribution doesn't... my understanding is distribution doesn't change like it does, like that. More frame rates in MP4 Lite and Cinelike A2 and the G7. Yeah. JC, as always, thanks for conducting these live videos. What is one feature you want the most for photo and one feature for video and future LUMIX cameras? That's a good question. I really don't know if I need or desire anything more than what is currently available for our stills and our video cameras. Yeah, let me think on that one, JC, and then like we'll check in on that one next week for that question. Kofi, there's so many videos shot in 420 where it was never stated and no one ever knew. All right, no one would ever know. Exactly. Fielding says, I use Lightroom Classic as my digital asset management for both photo and video. Don't edit video in it. Yeah. I noticed that it can't recognize G9 Mark II 420 MOV files, but it's fine with 422. Is that just an Adobe codec problem? Yes, that would be a problem on Adobe's side. If software ever runs into a problem where it can't read a file format from a camera, whether it's ours or anybody else's, it is most likely a problem on the software side that they haven't added a provision for that particular combination of formats. So most likely in that case, it's because it's an HEVC file versus 422. If you're on the it might not be HEVC versus H.264. It could just be a bit depth. They just might not have 420 as a supported format with our yeah, it's a combination of chroma subsampling, bit depth, and compression type. So yeah. Roger says, I got the S1R2 for photography, B-roll, and slow-mo. It will be the perfect companion to my S5II and S5. I'm in the process of setting it up now for my shooting preference. Like it so far. Awesome. Always glad to hear, people getting into the cameras and actually being able to use them. This place uses horrible color lights that screwed up my white balance. Yeah, that is definitely one of those, kind of cases, FC, where I have to white balance mistakes in post, but also want 120 unless RAW supports 120. So, FC, what you could do, now this starts to get into the realm of, you have to decide if it's worth it for, how often does this happen to you? Both on the Blackmagic Video Assist and on the Atmos Ninja recorders, we can output RAW in 120. We can do 4K 120. The thing you have to remember about that is our approach for RAW is that RAW is RAW and should never be processed in camera first. So we don't do subsampling or oversampling to create the RAW file that comes out later. Companies that do that are baking in things like noise reduction and a bunch of other crap into the image that, one, screws with dynamic range tests, and at that point it's not RAW, it's processed and you're just wrapping it as a RAW file. So we stick to pixel to pixel. That means if you wanted to do 4K 120, depending on the product that it is, if it's GH7, S1II Series, that thing, it's going to be punched in. It's about APS-C crop. In the GH7, I think it's, you're 25 megapixel for the sensor, and then you go down into 4K, so you're only around 8. So that's something to take in mind with it. You can do RAW in 4K 120, which would it would address a lot of your problems there. But it's up to you to decide, is that worth going down that path for that situation? Because you do have to account for things like framing, the different field of views, because you do have to crop in for it. Or I'm sorry, you have to window into the sensor for it. What is the largest size SD card that can be used in an S5II? This is from D Creative. It's a good question. I have not personally tested 1 or 2 terabyte cards. I think you can use up to 2 terabyte. Our file format system reads up to 2 terabyte, whether it's an SSD, a CF Express, or an SD card. The more important challenge you're going to run into, I think, with larger card size, when you get into like the 1 to 2 terabyte, is that they're not particularly fast. You may run into more situations where you have like read speed problems, because usually the higher the storage size you go, the slower the sustained write speeds go, depending on how they're creating it. Like some card manufacturers, if you buy a 512 gig SD card or CF Express card, The actual memory modules inside the card are probably 1 terabyte, but they're, I want to say in a very basic way, not saying this is how it's done, but to correlate it to something, it's the concept of like I'm putting my system in RAID, my SSDs in RAID, because I can get speed benefit, but not necessarily volume benefit. Some cards do that, some cards don't. It may just be trying to utilize a full 1 terabyte wafer and or module, and then yeah, you're kind of limited that way. So can you guys add the new console preview system to the S5 II? I have asked about this a lot, actually, because I really do like the new way we do it, but I do not have any updates for you. Sorry. Is there a way on the LUMIX S1II to lock the shutter speed in video mode without using the dial lock switch? No. You would need to use the dial lock. Now, the thing with using the dial lock is that if you don't want it to lock anything else, you can go in the menu and just have it leave everything else unlocked except that rear dial that you have assigned for the shutter speed. Roger, thanks for the answer. No worries. That's exactly why I'm here. If we wanted to collaborate with the brand for Instagram content and such, what's the best way to reach out? I am so glad you asked that. That actually brings... it's probably a good way to wrap up the stream, because I think that's one of the last questions or comments that we have here. So, if you're ever interested in wanting to actually, you know, kind of engage with the brand or kind of just get into the world of LUMIX, one of the best places to start is actually now over on our Discord. We do contests consistently now. We do feature spotlights where, you know, you share your content in the Discord, and if we really like it, we'll reach out and kind of coordinate, because we always want to feature and kind of tout, you know, those of you that want to, you know, obviously it's up to y'all if you ever wanted to do that stuff, but wanted to, you know, have your stuff shown on our page kind of thing, or on our social media channels. So if you want to go take a look at the LUMIX Discord, I do have a link down in the description. But I'm also going to drop a link here in the chat so that you can go over and take a look. The LUMIX Discord, it's the LUMIX Creators Club. It was originally created by Matthew Danew and a few others of other LUMIX creators. We are in there to support and back up and kind of add, you know, whatever we can to build a stronger community. It's been around, at least in the level of where we're supporting it, for a little over a year now at this point, I think, or maybe a little under a year. But that's an awesome place to start. There are a ton of different channels in there where you can, you know, ask us questions. You can give us suggestions. We did a microfilm sprint on there. We do highlights. There's a place where you can share your work with others. You can get, you know, feedback and info from others about, you know, what you're doing. You can learn from each other. There's a section there for Q&A and breakouts between L mount and Micro Four Thirds. I'm over on there as Sean from LUMIX, so I'm always able to be reached through that platform as well, and we can continue these kinds of conversations over on Discord. So I highly encourage you, if you haven't already, go take a look at the Discord. You can join up. Obviously, it's totally free. You get in there and just kick around. You'll find a ton of people in there. There's a ton of conversations always happening about, you know, not even necessarily LUMIX stuff. About, like, I'm looking at a conversation right now between a couple, specifically about things like different file formats and efficiencies and different codec options, and, you know, all the way down into conversations about AV1 and the different ways that you can work in, you know, exporting and stuff like that, all the way to, you know, I need help and troubleshoot with something. If I can't get to it, someone in the community may have an answer for you. Usually, if the answer is correct, I'll, you know, kind of either back it up, or if the answer is wrong, I'll jump in there and kind of help give some clarity. But that's definitely a platform. So you can always take a look at the Discord. I highly encourage you to jump over, get yourself set up over there. It is a fun platform. The nice thing is that it's also a passive platform. So if you're not someone who likes to interact necessarily, if you don't want to share your work, you don't have to. It's just a really good resource and an awesome community that is very supportive of each other. for all things creative, whether it's Lumix or you're just looking for creativity. So yeah, go check that out. Outside of that, everybody, I do have to wrap up now. I want to thank everybody for the awesome questions, the awesome conversations that we had today. Hopefully what I showed y'all about the, how to work with the different recording format functions on the camera, hopefully some of that was helpful to you, and you find some ways that may, help you be able to, more efficiently use your cameras out in the field. Remember that, pretty much everything that we use and I talk about here, even though I'm demoing on the S1II Series cameras, they're still relevant to the vast majority of our cameras in the last, 5 to 10 years. So just because we may not be talking about your particular camera here, know that, the iconography, the feature set, the terminology, a lot of that stuff is going to be pretty similar across the board. So other than that, we will be back next week at 2 p.m. right here on YouTube. So I encourage you to pop in, join us there. If you like the stream, if you like this conversation, give us a like. If you don't subscribe already, maybe think about subscribing to the channel, turning on notifications for when we go live, all that fun stuff. Otherwise, get out there, create some cool stuff. If you ever want to share it with us, follow us over on Instagram or tag us. We're LUMIX USA on Instagram. Let people know in the Creators Club in the Discord platform, or leave us comments down after this video if you've got more future questions or topics you want us to discuss in future live streams. With that, have a great day. Have an awesome weekend. Get out there, create stuff, and I will be back here next week, Thursday at 2 p.m. right here for LUMIX Live. Later, y'all.